The New York Islanders have had a troubled past. Ugly uniforms, arena hot potato, owners rotating like a deck of cards. There was one owner in particular. He was a con artist, a huckster, a fraud. You get the point. His actions put a black eye on both the Islanders and the NHL. His name was John Spano. Play the intro. John Spano was born in New York City in May of 1964, but grew up in Madison, Ohio. After graduating from Duquesne University with a degree in business administration, he bounced between sales jobs until he started the Bison Group, a Dallas-based airline leasing company, in 1990. But Spano wanted more. He wanted to own a professional sports team. Spano lived in Dallas and decided to buy a 50% stake in his hometown team, the Dallas Stars. He spent several months in the Stars' offices and reached an agreement. Yet when it was time to pay up, Spano made excuses. His excuses including needing a written agreement with the Stars' minor league team and having the Stars meet with his partners from South Africa. Stars owner Norm Green, yes, the same owner who moved the Stars from Minnesota to Dallas, backed out of the deal. Jim Lites, the Stars' president at the time and current CEO, even recalled visiting Spano's mansion. He stated that the place was unfurnished, to say the least. He also recalled that one time Spano insisted that Lites pick up the dinner tab. John Spano wasn't done. He tried to buy the Florida Panthers, but eventually left negotiations when owner Wayne Huizenga decided not to sell. Now let's talk about the Islanders. The New York Islanders were founded in 1972 to keep the World Hockey Association out of the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum after Nassau County petitioned for an NHL team. The Islanders have a rich history. The dynasty of the 80s, 19 straight playoff series victories, even starting the tradition of playoff beards. The late 80s and 90s saw the dynasty fall, but they had upside after a surprise run to the conference finals in 1993. That was quashed when they were swept in the first round the next season. By the New York Rangers, their biggest rival. That Rangers team won the cup. The Islanders, who once bullied their crosstown rival with chants of 1940, had hit rock bottom. And if you think it couldn't get any worse, the Isles revealed quite possibly one of the worst rebrands in sports. The Fishermen.
So you asked, when did the whole fisherman thing
Yeah.
start? So it's kind of a stranger than fiction story. The Islanders in 1994 go into the playoffs, and at that point, they had still been kind of the kings of the New York hockey scene. They had won the 4 straight Stanley Cups in the early 1980s, and all the dynasty stars like Mike Bossy, Brian Trottier, Dennis Potvin, future Hall of Famers are associated with this franchise. Then in 1994, the tide starts turning, and the Islanders face the Rangers in the first round of the playoffs and lose in humiliating fashion, get swept, and they end up, the Rangers end up winning the Stanley Cup that year, right? For the first time since 1940. So the first time in 54 years. And the Islanders ownership overreacts to that and says, well, because... But the Islanders ownership overreacted to the fact that the Islanders got swept by the Rangers in the 1994 playoffs, and ownership felt that fans are starting to associate the original Islanders logo more with losing to the Rangers in the playoffs than with the dynasty era success.
Because this
So
ownership,
they say, let's go.
This ownership, this was mainly the Gang of Four instead of, or was it John Pickett?
Right.
I remember reading.
Well, John Pickett was still, John Pickett was the owner, but he was an absentee owner at this point. He had moved to Florida and given control of the team to the group known as the Gang of Four, as you said, these minority stakeholders who ran day-to-day operations. So Pickett was essentially out to lunch. He was not involved in really running the team during this era. And the decision about the fisherman logo seems to have not included him at all. But they decided that, and for a lot of reasons, I think it was also, part of it was moving past the Rangers' loss, but I think it was also they wanted to make a lot of money fast. They thought they could get the windfall of maybe if you, you have, ownership is also thinking we could make a payday by changing our logo, selling new jerseys, selling all of this new fisherman gear to folks. So that's something that they had dreams of, maybe rappers on MTV wearing fisherman jerseys and people across the country and Canada buying these things. So that's part of how the fisherman logo came to be.
It's like I also remember the Islanders were like in the bottom 3 of merchandise sales back then. They were basically in the bottom 3.
Yeah, I mean merchandise sales weren't strong. And the Islanders did raise their ranks in the merchandise sales after they introduced the fisherman logo. So as much as people say the fisherman logo was a failure, yes, it certainly was a public relations nightmare. A lot of the players didn't like it. A lot of the fans didn't. But from the standpoint of sales, and again, even fans saying, well, I hated it. It was the worst logo. Well, they sold more jerseys that year than they had the previous year with the old logo. So make of that what you will. But, and I also think, and a big part of the book, as you probably know, is if the Islanders had won in the 95-96 season, then fans would have started to associate the fishermen with success. And maybe the fishermen would have caught on. But instead, they start losing. They not only losing, it was the way they were losing. It was this humiliating fashion. It was the "We want fish sticks" chants from the Rangers fans at Madison Square Garden, and Kirk Muller being traded to the Islanders and refusing to report. Like all of these things were happening around the team. And then I know you want to talk about John Spano coming in as this con artist, this fraud owner. So I think it's hard to separate the logo from everything else that happened. Mike Milbury as coach, then becoming general manager and being one of the least successful general managers in hockey history. I think all of that merges to become associated with the fishermen.
Like, I feel like with the fishermen, maybe it could have worked as a third jersey back in the day. A third jersey, perhaps, but the main design, it's a bit brash. Like, it would kind of be like if the Blues like got rid of the 64th note and replaced it with some cartoony music note, or like not exactly like cartoony music note, like a cartoony person playing a trumpet, like that. Like it's that tradition,
or something almost completely unrelated, right? It's because in the Islanders' case, there were a few problems. Number one, the Islanders had a legacy of success with that original beloved logo that with the NY and the map of Long Island on it. So fans associated that logo with winning 4 straight Stanley Cups and with all of their favorite players wearing it and the first logo the team ever wore and all of that. When you change to the fishermen, it looks like a departure from tradition. We're turning our back on all of the championship glory we once had. A lot of other franchises, and the St. Louis Blues are one of them, don't have, or at that point in their history, did not have that legacy of success. So when they're changing a logo, people might say, well, I miss the old logo, but it's not like we were winning all the time with it anyway. So maybe they're more receptive to that change. In this case, the fans were not receptive. It was clearly still in people's minds. It was only 10 years since the Islanders had last won the Stanley Cup. And it was more recent than that. The Islanders were still making the playoffs on a regular basis. So that's, and again, what they did here is they completely, like you say, they did not do a third jersey. They completely got rid of this. They said, we're just not going to ever wear the original logo ever again. And so it really seems so dramatic.
I think, didn't they, like, in their later, like, wasn't the year after they introduced the Fisherman, they took the white jersey and put the original logo on it, but it was navy instead of royal blue.
Right. And when the road jersey was the navy, and then the home jersey was white, and it still had the wave across the bottom and the lighthouse patch on the shoulders, but it didn't have the fisherman logo, right? So it had that original Islanders crest, and that was a way to slowly move back to that logo full time. A lot of fans actually say they like that jersey, and I see people wearing that jersey from time to time at games, and so that one still has a little bit of allure among the fan base.
I mean, the lighthouse patch is not bad. I feel like once again, if it was a third jersey, it might have worked, or if it was done, if Pickett had some bit of a say.
Right. I mean, the lighthouse jersey. So the lighthouse patch. Lots of fans say that they like that lighthouse patch. It seems like a appropriate emblem of Long Island. The issue with the fisherman, there were several. Some is that he looked a lot like the Gorton's Frozen Seafood brand mascot. So that led to the We Want Fish Sticks. It led to comparisons with Jiggs McDonald and Stan Fischler, Islanders broadcasters, or any other number of like bearded people in hockey. So that's part of that issue. And also just like, there aren't a lot of fishermen like on Long Island anymore. That's like part of Long Island's heritage. But yeah, I don't think people feel like a strong connection to the fisherman lifestyle.
Because isn't there also the Billy Joel was a big part of this?
Yeah, so a few years before the Fisherman logo came out in 1988, I believe it was, Billy Joel had come out with a song named Downeaster Alexa, which ends with the line, "There ain't no island left for Islanders like me." And in the music video for Downeaster Alexa, we see all of these bearded, gruff-looking fishermen whose way of life is being threatened by new state regulations and just passage of time and all that. And so the designers were apparently told, look toward that music video for Downeaster Alexa. That's the kind of image we want to evoke of a fisherman. And actually at the press conference to unveil the fisherman logo, the Islanders invited one of the fishermen, Dan King, who had been in the music video. I interviewed him for the book. So yeah, Billy Joel has this odd connection, and there maybe was some hope among the Islanders brass that Billy Joel would then attend games the way Jack Nicholson does at the Lakers games or Spike Lee at the Knicks games, and maybe Billy Joel will lend some more cachet to the Islanders brand because, oh, he's going to the game tonight, let's go, and maybe we can see him and get a photo with him and all that. But as far as I could tell, Billy Joel has never been a hockey fan. I don't think I've ever heard of him going to an Islanders game. So it just, yes, he's a big Long Island celebrity. He's like the guy on Long Island. But hoping for him to somehow like this jersey and then want to start coming to games just seemed like a unrealistic idea.
Because like the island is basically it's the heart of the brand for the Islanders. Like because they're not in the New York metropolitan area of like Manhattan, the Bronx, or even kind of even Brooklyn. It's like they're a bit separated from all of the New York area. So that's what makes them unique.
Yes, and well, actually, so that part of the Fisherman rebrand, I personally think was on target. For too long, the Islanders were trying to get a piece of that New York market and tried to get the fans who were living in Manhattan and the other boroughs, as you've mentioned. The Islanders were trying to appeal to that fan base too, even though the Rangers are closer, but it's tantalizing. Long Island is right next to New York City. So it's tantalizing to think Maybe we can get a bunch of those millions of fans that are out there. However, culturally, there's a big distinction between Long Island and New York City lifestyles, the way people get around, the sorts of things they like to do, the kind of suburban culture of Long Island, families, beaches, versus New York City and more of the maybe mobile, upwardly mobile, younger people, the kind of business dynamic, the subways, taxis. There's a kind of difference in the way people approach life in lots of ways. And so I thought that the Islanders were wise to double down on Long Island identity. What separates us from the city? The beach, the ocean, fishing. Those are some things that you can get that are, so I do think that isn't the worst image. Again, maybe the type of fisherman that they chose looked a little bit too much like Gorton's. Maybe there were some other aspects of how they went about the rebrand. I think some of the people who ended up being associated with the rebrand, unfortunately, were not the best ambassadors. Mike Milbury is the first coach who becomes general manager and is very unpopular with his players, and John Spano, who becomes the owner and is originally viewed as the savior who's going to pump all of this money into the team and rebuild Nassau Coliseum, their arena, and turns out to be a fraud con artist who doesn't really have the money to pay for them, and all of this embarrassing stuff. So it's, again, hard to separate the logo from all of the chaos happening around it. And I understand why Islanders fans today, even though it's just an article of clothing, you look at the fisherman jersey as this horrific, horrendous symbol of an era that they want to forget.
To put it lightly, the fisherman is a perfect example of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Back on topic, owner John Pickett wanted out. As mentioned before, he had handed over day-to-day operations to a group of businessmen who each bought a 2.5% interest, adding up to 10% of the Isles' ownership. These four were dubbed as the Gang of Four. There was also head coach and general manager Mike Milbury, who was only hired because he beat a Rangers fan with a shoe and hated the Rangers. Besides ownership turmoil and a rebrand that resembled a frozen food mascot instead of a professional hockey team, Nassau Coliseum was falling apart. Pipes were leaking, the place wasn't being maintained properly, everything was wrong with the Islanders. This is where our friend John Spano comes in. A few months after the Panthers deal fell through, Spano decided to buy the Islanders. In October of 1996, Spano made a deal with John Pickett to buy his stake in the Islanders. Spano, using forged documents and letters, had convinced Pickett, NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman, and several banks that he was worth $230 million, most of which was from an inheritance from his grandfather, he claimed. On February 24, 1997, Spano was officially approved as owner of the New York Islanders, using a loan from several banks. He was a godsend to Isles fans. He promised to keep the team on Long Island instead of moving them. He said they would be huge players in free agency. He talked about either renovating or replacing Nassau Coliseum. And the best thing he did was fire Mike Milbury, the coach. Well, he didn't fire him, he just forced him to give up coaching to Rick Bowness. Should have forced him on his GM, but what do I know? It's not like Milbury will do anything bad to the Isles, right? NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman said that John Spano was the type of person we want as an owner. Spano and Pickett had negotiated the sale to a total of $165 million. $80 million for Pickett's stake, and $85 million for the Islanders' cable TV contract. The $80 million was paid through the loans. The cable contract would be paid through a 5-year period. On April 7th, the first payment for the cable contract was due, yet Pickett never got the money. Spano made excuses as to why the money wasn't there and said he would wire the payment. Spano eventually had to fork over money. Only problem is he intentionally sent the wrong amount. For a $5 million payment, he only sent $5,000. He sent two $17 million checks to Pickett, except one bounced and the other one was only $1,700. Something wasn't right. In June of 1997, the NHL's Board of Governors, aka the owners, met. All owners were present except for Spano. Instead, two men representing former owner John Pickett. Pickett told Bettman and the NHL to step in. A Long Island-based newspaper called Newsday launched an investigation into Spano, using information from anonymous Islanders executives and even Mike Milbury and former Islanders legend Dennis Potvin. A week later, the report was released. Turns out that Spano was only worth $5 million. His company, the Bison Group, only had 22 employees and was only worth $3 million, and his inherited wealth was only $220,000. He also owed $85,000 in back taxes on his house in Dallas. 2 days after the report was released, Spano gave the Islanders back to Pickett so he wouldn't sue him for breach of contract. You thought this was done? Oh no, it's just begun. Spano had been charged with multiple counts of bank fraud, wire fraud, and forgery on Long Island. A month later, he was also charged for wire fraud and bank fraud in Fort Worth. He also owed Fleet Bank for that loan to buy Pickett's stake. Another thing to mention was that Spano was being federally investigated for those crimes. John Spano escaped the law by fleeing to the Cayman Islands, but after a few months, he returned to the United States. On October 8, 1997, he pled guilty to fraud on Long Island and Dallas, and bank fraud in Boston for the Fleet Bank loan. Spano would be in jail for several months but was released early, only to return to prison for several times for crimes that include fraud, theft, and forgery. In the end, he had to pay the Islanders $3.4 million, two Dallas businessmen $4.4 million, and Mario Lemieux $1.25 million. In the end, Spano had to pay over $11.9 million to all of his victims. He is currently in prison and, in fact, will be released in November of this year. The John Spano saga was an embarrassment for both the NHL and the Islanders. Instead of properly vetting Spano and detecting him as a fraud, Bettman was fooled. Fortunately today, owners are vetted more than they were back then, and today's technology wouldn't allow for another Spano to happen. After Spano was gone, the Islanders wouldn't get better. Between Mike Milbury, the GM, and Garth Snow, the GM, the Isles did nothing but shoot themselves in the foot repeatedly. From 1997 to 2018, the Islanders made the playoffs 7 times. How many series did they win? 1. And even then, an anonymous trip told me it has an asterisk on it. It seemed like the Islanders were doomed to a cycle of mediocrity and potentially leaving the island. Until summer of 2018. Thanks to the hires of Lou Lamoriello and Barry Trotz, the Islanders re-emerged as a dominant team, including 2 conference finals appearances in 2020 and 2021. But after Trotz was fired, the Isles haven't been the same. They're a hard team to decipher nowadays. It seems like they've all but clinched a playoff spot, but if they'll ever win a cup, it's hard to tell. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And a huge thanks to Nick Hirshon. I recommend reading his book, We Want Fish Sticks, the bizarre and infamous rebranding of the New York Islanders, for more information on the Fisherman rebrand and the chaos that took place. I'll see you in the next video.